Welcome to the Good Food CFO podcast. I'm your host, Sarah Delavan, and I'm joined by our producer, Chelsea Steer.
Hey, Sarah. Before we get started, I want to remind everyone listening, if you haven't yet, please subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen or watch if you're watching on YouTube. And if you're so inclined, we would love for you to leave us a review, as that is the number one way that we get this podcast in front of more people just like you. Okay. So today on the podcast, we're airing your conversation with Peter Henry.
Peter, he is such an interesting guest. So he's the founder of a company called 10 by 10 Logistics. And it came to be, as so many things in the food industry come to be, right? Out of a need that he recognized after working in farmers markets for a number of years. So he started by selling cheese in NYC's Greenmarkets. He tripled sales for, the cheese brand that he was working for, moved into national sales and marketing. And then due to some things that happened within that organization, and he gets into that in the episode, he found himself back in farmers markets and recognizing this need and his ability to solve a problem, which is efficiency in getting to farmers markets, setting up at farmers markets, staffing farmers markets for so many farms and producers. And it's really, really interesting to hear what he has to say about, how important farmers markets are to our food systems, right? And for the people who shop there. The ways in which 10 by 10 Logistics is making farmers market sales more efficient, and his thoughts on how individual sellers, right, farmers, producers can collaborate to potentially make their processes more efficient without having to rely on a third party like 10 by 10, which I think is really fascinating. He also talks a lot about the value of personal relationships and letting go to embrace teamwork and what it takes to support his roster of farmers and businesses. It's a really interesting conversation. He's a super interesting guy, as I said, and I just love the idea of this business that he's created.
This is going to be a really great episode for our audience to check out. But before we get into that, we just read a news story that is fascinating on so many levels.
Yeah.
And I think that we're going to try to distill it down and really focus in on just the few pieces that stood out the most to us. But this might be a news story that we revisit, I think, for a whole episode, just because of how much there is there.
I mean, it's from one of our favorite news sources, which is Civil Eats. If you don't have a subscription and you're interested in food industry news, I highly recommend that you go and subscribe to support their work. I think it's extremely important. So it's a long article. It's a fairly detailed article. It's a fascinating and interesting article. There were a couple times that I chuckled, not necessarily for a good reason. And like you said, we can't get into like every nook and cranny of what this article covered, but there's definitely an overarching theme to the article that I feel like is important for us to talk about here. And so I'm excited to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. So this article was titled, "Investment is Flowing to U.S. Grass-Fed Beef Again. Will it scale up?" And we're going to link to that in the show notes so that anyone who wants to read the full article can. But Sarah, when we read it, you specifically called out that there was this one like really overarching theme. Tell us what you saw there.
Yeah. The overarching theme for me, or what kind of really stood out to me, was that this is an example of a really large organization that is extremely well funded, talking about, trying to get into what I'll call sort of quote mainstream channels, right? Retail, grocery, large food service accounts, etc. It also shows smaller businesses who are also being funded anywhere from $1 million to $4 million within the examples they're using in this article, and how they're choosing not to do that. And instead, they're building their businesses on their own terms and focusing on local and regional growth and how that supports both local economies and local food systems. And so to me, the big takeaway is that example of these businesses doing things on their own terms and being very rooted in the why they're doing it on their own terms.
Yeah, absolutely. You're right. I think the article gives us a inside look into both sides of the way that food business is done in the food industry, right? And
Yeah.
it starts out spotlighting this gentleman, Jeff. And I don't think either of us really know how to say his name. Tripishian, I believe, is how you pronounce his last name. But he goes by Trip. So that's what we're going to call him here. And he is the CEO of Grass Fed Foods, which is a like investment company, essentially. And they have invested in Matador Ranch, which is a ranch owned by Rupert Murdoch. It is a cattle ranch. And the cattle ranch itself is essentially trying to expand its grass-fed beef like production and sales into the industry. And as you've already pointed out, by going into these big retail and food service channels. And so the article starts by telling a story of Tripp bringing buyers from Costco, Sysco, Whole Foods onto the ranch, giving them a tour.
So I want to back up for just a second here, Chelsea, and talk about the grass-fed beef market, if you will. So according to the article, it says that grass-fed beef sales accounted for just 4% of commercial market sales in 2016. So there's not a lot of data on this, but that's some reliable data that they were able to find. The really interesting thing about this is that nearly all of those sales came from imported grass-fed beef from Australia, New Zealand, and other foreign countries where the cost to produce grass-fed beef is less than here in the US. And if you're listening as I was reading and you're wondering, well, where is all of the US grass-fed beef going? Or is there just not as much of it as I thought there was? It's being sold primarily regionally at farmers markets and through meat shares and in restaurants. So it's not that there's a lack of grass-fed beef on the market. It's just not making its way to the traditional channels, right? It's not making its way into the data, which I think is really interesting. And it also shows like kind of a peek into where we are as a food system and as an industry when it comes to the sale of grass-fed beef.
Yeah. And I think this is where Tripp is really thinking about going big and seeing this opportunity within those mainstream channels. But at the same time, other investment firms, as you have already pointed out, are, working with companies like Creamco Meats, White Oak Pastures, and Old Salt Co-op, just to name a few that are listed here in the article. And they are getting investments that they are using to really maintain their focus on growth within their regional food systems.
Each of the companies that you're mentioning, Chels, has like very specific reasons for why they're keeping their businesses regional and not trying to get into big retail, right? So Cole Mannix, who is the founder of Old Salt Co-op, says that they created Old Salt to build a regional meat supply chain that bypasses the consolidated food system and keeps dollars and ecosystem benefits within local communities. That's a great reason to stay local and regional, right? But there are also other reasons. And one of those other reasons is pointed out in the article by Will Harris of White Oak Pastures, who's considered to be an icon in the industry. He told attendees of a recent conference that White Oak Pastures' wholesale business isn't penciling out because it can't compete with imports, right? And most producers are doubling down on building their own regional supply chains and direct-to-consumer online sales. Going a little bit further, Mannix, again from Old Salt, says that that's where he's investing his energy, right, in these regional systems, because it's not that he believes there's a one-size-fits-all scale where everybody has to sell direct to consumer, but It's that our food system has gone so far down the path it's on that there's very little opportunity in the form of wholesalers that will buy from them at the prices they need to sell at, distributors who will work with these regional ranches, or regional processing capacity that's easily accessed. So they're really starting from the ground level to rebuild. And Chelsea, if you remember the True Cost of Food episode, which I'm sure you do, we had conversations about the lack of infrastructure that exists to support small businesses. And so I think what Mannix is saying here is so true, and that it's very difficult for what I'll call a small ranch. And I'm not exactly sure how to qualify that, but it's not Matador size, right?
Yeah.
It's difficult for them to get to a regional processing facility. It's difficult, you know what I mean? And there's so many costs associated with it that step number one is to build the infrastructure you need to grow. And I think that that's really important to highlight.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And on the like, not on the flip side, but like as we play that out, right? What I'm hearing is there's no way, again, referencing back to our True Cost of Food episode, is that there's no way for these beef ranchers, cattle ranchers
Mm-hmm.
to compete with a commodity beef if they don't have that infrastructure and be able to bring their pricing down.
Yeah. And what I want to also say here is that I've had the privilege to communicate with and to work with some ranchers and to see their financials. And what I can say is that regional businesses can be profitable. I think when people think regional, they think small. There are regional businesses making millions of dollars, having plans to, double and triple their revenue on a regional basis without going into these wholesale relationships. Sure, they have relationships with regional restaurants, as they point out here. They may have relationships with local school districts and cafeterias and things like that. That's an amazing way to increase the reach of good food, in my opinion, right? And it also goes back to taking care of the health of the people in your community, taking care of your community financially, right? By creating jobs and all of these different things. So I want people to hear me loud and clear that regional does not mean small in the sense of that there's like a cap on how much money you can generate in terms of revenue regionally. And these ranches are also profitable. There's a point in the article where it says, I believe, that Matador needs to sell something like 5,200 head of cattle to break even. And currently they're actually relying some on commodity beef to help, supplement financially the ranch and its ability to stay ranching, if you will. So smaller regenerative ranches don't have that super high need. They can break even at, 500, 550, 600 head of cattle, and anything beyond that can be profitable. So it goes back to also right sizing, right? This is a great example of another part of our food industry that's identifying how to right size. And they're not doing it because it's potentially becoming trendy. They're doing it for so many good reasons, and also because they believe in it as a business. They believe in it as an important piece of our food industry and food supply chain. And I'm very happy. I want to applaud them. I don't know if my applause matters to them, but I'm very happy to see. And I'm also so happy that Civil Eats is highlighting this. And of course, we'll watch what happens with Matador, and we'll kind of follow this story a little bit. But I encourage anybody who has an interest in like beef, grass-fed beef, ranching, marketing in our food system to dive into this article, because we're literally just scratching the surface of what they're talking about.
Yeah, there is a lot in this article that we haven't even touched, and we may in the future, but I think this first piece was just it's so aligned with the things that we talk about here all the time on the podcast that we both got really excited to have the conversation and to bring it to our audience.
Yeah, and I want to say this. It is true that Cream Co. Meats has been on our podcast wish list for a couple of seasons now, and we haven't reached out because we don't know anybody there. So if you're listening and you know anybody at Cream Co., we'd love to talk with them, and maybe we can do sort of a ranching roundtable. I think that would be really cool.
Oh, that would be so cool. That would be so cool. I love a good roundtable.
Me too.
Sarah, are you ready to jump into this conversation with Peter?
I am. I'm excited for everybody to hear it. So let's get to it.
Okay. Are you looking for support to tackle the financial work of growing or sustaining a profitable food business without hiring a consultant? Or maybe you want a different way to look at your food business financials. Now you can join Sarah Delavan for the weekly CFO office hours. Our setting allows you to get FaceTime with Sarah and a small group of your peers. Each week, the group will dive into the work that you're doing, support you when you're feeling stuck, and give you the confidence that you're on the path to profitability. Our March session starts Thursday, March 7th. Seating is limited, so be sure to get your pass now. Just visit thegoodfoodcfo.com and click on services. And now, back to the show.
Hey, Peter, welcome to the podcast.
Hi. Thanks very much for having me.
Yeah, I'm super excited to chat with you today. So you are the founder of 10 by 10, which A, is an amazing name, and B, I cannot wait to talk about and share with our listeners because so many folks start out at and then continue to sell at farmers markets throughout the life of their business. So just really excited to dive in.
Farmers markets are they're everywhere. Everybody has like their kind of like childhood memories of them, whether they're from Europe or from the US. And it's, I didn't go to them as much growing up, but I think once I came to New York City, when I really saw like the critical mass of what farmers markets are here. I mean, there are like Grow NYC, which is the main organization alone. I think they have 55 markets a week at the peak of their season, but that's just Grow NYC. There are at least, I can think of at least 3 off the top of my head, other organizations, 4 actually off the top of my head, that do their own markets all over the city, some seasonal, some year round. And yeah, I don't know. It's never gonna fix the food system, like I love the idea of it, but that doesn't, my mindset has always been that doesn't mean it can't be better.
I agree. They serve a wonderful purpose and they're a piece of the solution.
For businesses at a lot of different scales too. I think I think we think of it as just like the first step of a business getting off the ground, but like if you can communicate right to your customers, if you can, make the logistics make sense, which is, what we'll talk about, I'm sure, but like it can be an asset to businesses of all different sizes. We'll get into it, but the cheesemaker I worked for was distributing nationally and was in 400 Kroger locations. And we still were like the neighborhood favorite cheese of like a 10-year-old in Jackson Heights, Queens. And it wasn't just like the appeal or the fun or the kind of, habit of that. It serves a functional purpose in the growth of the business too.
Totally. Yeah. So tell me a little bit about how you entered the food industry. Like what kind of work did you do prior to starting 10 by 10?
I went to school. I graduated from college in 2009. So middle of the financial crisis with an English major. That is from a school in Iowa that most people haven't heard of. I moved to New York City with 4 of my best friends from high school who we've all been playing music together pretty much every summer. Instead of doing, internships and building career connections, we were going back to Pittsburgh and recording music and playing shows. I play saxophone. Yeah, so I came to New York City to play music, and that means I came to New York City to be in the restaurant industry, basically, because that's the next best thing. I'd done a little bit of like catering delivery and like some bartender, not bartending, back waiting at that time. Not a good server in any way, but I just kind of like worked my way up through restaurant work. Through the luck of working at a hip, trendy pop-up restaurant that closed early, through the managers at that business, I was able to get a job at Blue Hill, which is like the farm to take, Dan Barber is like created a movement in a way, or just like not, didn't create the farm to table movement, obviously, but like I learned a lot of that role that really kind of laid the groundwork for how I approached food after that. Because before that, it was just kind of like I liked restaurants and it was fun. But that's where I kind of got to learn about like crafting it into a narrative. I had an opportunity to work for a cheesemaker called Consider Bardwell. I knew of them because Blue Hill carried this cheese. There was a course at Stone Barns. They had a course that was centered around one of their cheeses. I knew of them as the cheesemaker with a weird name. They're from Southwest Vermont. And I had an idea of working for them as being like, oh, I get to like, you know, go talk to the fine dining chefs and eat at the bar and get to, you know, be the city representative. What it actually was working the farmers markets. You know, went from wearing a nice outfit and bartending and expediting at Blue Hill to getting up at 5 a.m. to drive a cargo van to Union Square and set up in February temperatures to sell cheese just in a public park.
Yeah, that's a different life.
It is. Didn't expect to like it. And I didn't expect to kind of get into it nearly. I mean, certainly not to have a company in that space.
Yeah.
However many, 9 years later.
How long did you work for that cheese company at the farmer's market?
So, let's see, I worked for Blue Hill for 3 years. I worked for Consider Bardwell from 2014 to 2019. It's funny, you know, farmers markets aren't always the farmer. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Like when you go to a farmer's market, the person you're buying from often isn't the farmer. And when it is the farmer, it's not. We have this idea in America of just, you know, there is the American image of the farmer as a single person business, as someone who gets up and pulls the cheese out of the oven at 2 a.m. and like, you know, drives down to the market for 4 hours and sells all by themselves.
And they make a living at the one market that they sell at.
Yeah, exactly. That one market, 1 day a week. Mm-hmm. But no, the reality of it is that these are businesses. And Consider Bardwell had been around for a couple of years by then. They had some wholesale business, but farmers markets were kind of the starting point for them, but also a good, sustainable source of business. I kind of started as a farmer's market worker. I got to get into wholesale sales for them as well. Briefly ran sales for the whole country. I mean, we had incredible cheese, incredible market staff, incredible cheesemakers, and got some really, you know, goodwill connections in the industry too and grew.
Yeah. So you identified a need in the world of farmers markets that folks, farmers, and I think even we'll call them like artisan makers, right? Or small batch makers who also sell at farmers markets. There's a specific need that arose to you that you identified.
Right. I started working with this other farmer in the town of Paulet, which is where Consider Bardwell was.
Okay.
And it was a similar model where they're 4.5 hours from the city and they can raise pigs, but they can't, you know, they can't drive 4.5 hours each way to do one single market in the city.
Yeah.
And even if they could, they might not be the best people to do that. Certainly not after a 4.5 hour drive every single weekend for, you know, with 2 kids and everything. Also with the fact that you want to be able to serve your own local community as well, while also acknowledging the fact that farms are rural. And so, you know, we like the idea of kind of local as local can be, but we have to kind of go to where the capital is, which is in cities. Mm-hmm. And you know, it's easier to get labor to work at markets in the cities as well. And I helped them get into the markets. And at the same time, there was a honey producer who did the markets, who I knew him and his son from working stands next to them when I was selling cheese. He needed help managing his markets in the city, but also with the transportation. And they both kind of like shared each other's vehicles a little bit. One of them had a van, one of them had a cargo van. And at a certain point, I just kind of saw this thing that every producer did, which was, you know, get to and from the market, and saw how much it cost each farm and realized that I could do it for them for less and also bring other people into that capacity.
Yeah.
We like the idea of shopping locally at farmers markets, but the carbon footprint of food coming from California or coming from overseas on a shipping boat, you know, in a shipping container can be a lot lower than, you know, 50 pickup trucks coming from 50 different towns going all to the same location. And I also saw the ways in which, you know, just everything that a food business takes and where that ends up at the bottom line of being what the consumer pays. And there were times when I would see the inefficiencies in our own business. And then the next day I would go to a customer and tell them, well, we have to charge $30 a pound for this cheese because that's the real cost of food. Right. And I kind of realized how much of a lie that was in some way. Not a lie, but it's just that like you have a responsibility as a business you have control over some of these things. Mm-hmm. And you want people to be paying for something that's like truly unique, truly better than what they would get in a supermarket, have this connection with the actual producer, but you don't want them to pay for inefficient logistics, for something that's only a certain way because you don't want to change in any way. You like having it all your own in your own canopy and not working with anybody else. You think about like the essential part of a product, like what's the thing that people really need and what's the thing that keep you aboard, and transportation to and from the market is not really something that a farm needs to be doing themselves.
Yeah, but they had to up until a certain point, right? Or farmers are busy, so busy that like they never get back to you. I remember I was a buyer in my former, career. The only time a farmer would speak to me was when I was in front of them at the market. It was a pen and paper relationship. I needed to know what I wanted a week or a month in advance, and I needed to communicate it to them then. I mean, they're also not really business people in many cases. So I think this idea, to me, the idea of like, I'm going to put together and facilitate transportation of all of our, that's like probably the last thing on their mind. They're like, I just need to get my stuff from here, to there. And I think the other thing that's popping into my mind is I'm thinking of every meat producer, like here in California, who has to drive their live animals 2 miles to go get it processed and back. Like no one wants to pay for that. You're right. And the farmer doesn't want to pay for that transportation either. And it's a antiquated, unnecessary part of local food because we don't have an infrastructure for it. So I don't know. I mean, I do hear what you're saying, but I think lack of infrastructure and opportunity to create what you've now created is, I think, why the true cost of food was higher than it could be.
Yeah, sure. I'm not saying that anyone at markets are gouging. Look, the way that we have food in supermarkets that are centrally owned with central distribution and with single buyers, I guess what we're doing is I just kind of try to see the things in the farmers market system that didn't have to be the particular way they had been, while still, retaining what was special about them.
Yeah. So what did you do? Did you launch essentially with like those 2 farms, like the honey guy and the pork?
Yeah. So first I started just with Grow NYC Greenmarkets, and that still is a ton of markets. People think of Union Square as the kind of iconic market, but there are only so many spots there, and a lot of the spots there are, taken by farmers who've been in the program for 10, 20 years. So there are a lot of satellite markets. There are a lot of markets that are all over the city that do great and that are really like wonderful, unique character to each of them. Jackson Heights, I mentioned earlier, was like my favorite market to work in every week. Yeah. So what we did was, it was a very uncertain model. So, and I had no like backing capital to get into this really. And had no experience doing that. So I wasn't about to just try to like put together a deck. But the idea was basically like, oh, this is unconventional. It's mostly Saturday and Sunday business. So what I did is I found an owner operator, tried a couple of different people of a vehicle, of a truck, basically, to say like, look, this is what I can guarantee you is, what I need is consistency. If I can book the truck to full capacity, then that benefits me, but you'll always get, I basically offered a guaranteed fee for every single day of operation for guaranteed service.
Right.
And I found somebody tremendous who, again, I think about all the ways in which I try to make the business models like systematized and consistent and kind of error proof. But at the end of the day, you look back and you realize like, wow, these were cool ideas, but it would have been nothing without the people that I was lucky enough to find and meet through it and who kind of like gave it their own spin. So one thing about doing the markets, we could do a lot of markets. When I was with the cheese producer, we were doing up to 5 markets out of one cargo van on one day. So basically we would load everything up the night before and drop off at 4 locations. And then the last location is where the driver would work. And it was a crazy day for the driver. The rest of them, the market worker, somebody local in the city would just show up and work the day.
Yeah.
So I remember how taxing that was on our bodies, loading and unloading an entire cargo van with like 80-pound coolers of cheese at the beginning of the day. How if you forgot tent weights at the first location, you had to stop selling, drive all the way back across the city and get it. So the first big change was palletizing everything. So basically, I found a driver with a straight truck with a lift gate, and the warehouse space that I was located at had a shared loading dock. So we would palletize each single 10 by 10 tent, had everything packed onto this one pallet that it needed for the whole day. Tent, table, weights, coolers of product, ice packs as needed, a tablet, change cash to start the day. The driver didn't have to worry about a laundry list of 50 drops at each thing. He just had to drop one pallet at one location, and that was it.
That's great.
And it ended up being a boon for the green market organizers as well, because they used to have vehicle parking for every single farmer to have to worry about. But with us, we had one vehicle for up to 12 stands, I guess 12 to 13 stands in one truck.
So let me make sure I'm understanding you correctly. So you would load a truck with several pallets that were all going to go to the same market.
Or multiple markets.
Okay.
Yeah. So, for example, right now on Saturdays, we have two 26-foot trucks.
Okay.
That from Wednesday through Friday, we are at the warehouse packing to different degrees, all of that product. So basically, we don't work with fresh veg right now, mostly with packaged stuff. So right now we have duck, pork, beef, salami, 2 different cheese producers, maple syrup, honey, and they all give us their product kind of on their own schedule. It would be great if I could have a centralized inventory system and I could kind of pull from them and I could tell them, hey, this is how much. But again, farmers operate on their own schedules. They deliver their product to us during the week. We hold their equipment in the city. We pack everything for each market. Some markets get more, some markets get less. Sometimes there's special orders. And then on Saturdays right now, we have one 26-foot truck that goes to the Upper East Side for 2 pallets, then up to Inwood for 3 pallets, 2 on the West Side, and then down to Union Square. And we have a Brooklyn truck that hits 3 different markets, hits about 3 or 4 pallets at each location. So the drivers are loading up as early as 3 in the morning on Saturdays. They're done with the first part of their day by 7:30. And then they don't work until usually around 2-ish, 3-ish when the pickups start again.
So when the farmers are dropping off their product, it's not like on Saturday morning or on day of market.
Right.
That's it. So it's like, oh, this is when it fits into our schedule and we can go and do a drop at your location.
And the idea is to try to make it operate as much like a distribution model as possible.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. I always kind of thought I would be able to find new vendors to bring into the markets. Mm-hmm. So far, much of the business has been existing producers who just can't take the shift, or it just doesn't logistically make sense for them, or they can do better selling at a local market closer to them that day.
Right.
The idea is to try to fit the delivery into their schedule. So they just send to us bulk, and in some cases we'll manage the inventory. In some cases they'll tell us kind of what to send where.
In areas where you don't exist, where 10 by 10 doesn't exist, and when we were communicating via email, you had stated that you try to encourage other small producers. We talked about farmers a little bit, to work together to help make their farmers market sales support their broader business goal. And I'm curious about that. What do you think that looks like, and how do you think that can take shape? Because like I said at the top of the episode, I think the vast majority of folks who listen to this podcast, they either started at farmers markets or they're at farmers markets now, and it continues to be a big part of their long-term business plan, whether they're selling into retail or not. Having that sort of local community relationships and posts at the farmers market is super important.
That's kind of the mindset that I had coming out of Consider Bardwell, which we had started in the markets, but the growth of the business was to be through wholesale, was to sell to cheese counters around the country. But it's a scary industry getting into wholesale, making the jump from full retail in the same way as doing a market yourself to working with someone like ourselves, where we're asking them to trust us with their entire business and to figure out the economics around that. Of a lot of producers going from the model where, oh, well, I just drive everything down myself in a car that I own, so transportation's free for me.
Right.
And to kind of remind people that just well, no, that's if you're going to have some kind of scalable model, you have to pay yourself and all that. So yeah, that's the big puzzle, is really trying to figure out what common lessons are to be learned from a farmer's market in New York City, where we have this critical mass that other people can pick up.
I think you bring up a good point, which is there is a lot of sort of logistical costs associated with selling your product at farmers market, because one market is not going to earn a living for you, the farmer or the producer, right? You're going to need more than one market. We know that for sure. And if you choose to stay a farmers market brand and you sell at multiple markets, I think I know just from experience and some of the clients I've worked with, it's a logistical HR planning nightmare. Okay, we've got 6 markets and they're all within like an hour from our headquarters, but they all start at different times and we want to get to all of them with one driver. And how are we going to do it? Are we going to have somebody like you're saying, pack all the coolers the night before and then drive them around? Or do we have everyone come here and then go back? And what makes the most financial sense? And building that into the cost of the product. It's like, if there could be a better way that we can provide our product to people via the farmers market, make it less expensive for us and for them, that's a win-win situation. Oh, and also if just logistically I don't have to think about it anymore, that's icing on the cake.
Yeah, just talking to your neighbors, talking to other producers who are in the exact same boat as you. They know they have to pay the same to be there. They have to find labor just as you do. And that's how we started, basically. I didn't start from a specific products or specific towns outside of New York City. I started from, all right, well, this producer has similar handling needs. They don't have 3/10 of fragile vegetables. They have jars of stuff. And so they're along our route. They have a similar, burden of handling. We can work together in that way. It's, again, looking to the way that all of the other food operates is like, it's scale, it's reducing the variables as much as possible. And a lot of that is, it's just the nature of working with other people, trying to ask them to, hey, let's all use the same type of tent so we don't have to keep them all separate. Let's use all the same type of tent weight instead of keeping. That's been the biggest fight of mine, is trying to get all of my farmers onto one tent weight system, because at the farmers markets, you see every abomination of concrete with a little hook sticking out of it, and just go to kettlebells, guys. It's the best. Kettlebells in a milk crate. They don't roll around in the car. They're easy to pick up.
They're like, no, I'd rather pour cement into a Home Depot bucket and stick a...
Right, exactly. Yeah. And just always once a season break a toe with it in some way.
Does 10 by 10, do you all provide the market team?
Depending. So kind of the core structure of the business is basically you get us your product and your gear, we get it to and from markets. Some people, because they already have been doing markets, they have staff in the city that have worked for them for years and they do it. But now for 3 out of 12 of the farms, we are doing that, finding and hiring. And that's kind of, I love that part, and I love kind of building and finding people who do that really well, because, it's in the same way that I saw people who were servers who were older than me at Blue Hill when I started, or had just been there, had been in the industry longer than me. And it's a trade. It's a great, it's skill set, and it can, the idea of that being a living and a specialty that people can do, so is really cool to me. And it's a cool job to get to come home at the end of the day with just the best food you could possibly get in the city. That's one of the economies of scale for us, in that I have people cross-trained on both of the stands, or on multiple stands, basically. So if somebody works a Saturday, but we have a call out on Sunday, I can bring them up, or I can talk to somebody who used to work for us, but is still available on the weekends. People eventually get into a 9 to 5 Monday to Friday, and they don't want to work every weekend, but it'd be great for them to pick up a shift every now and then. And sometimes it's fun to be able to get to go up to the farm. That was a big part of the job for me, was getting to entertain buyers and chefs every now and then, but also just getting to visit myself. And I want to be able to do that more often. But I think the next best thing that I'm trying to do a better job of is just kind of building that community of workers in the city and connecting the market managers with the workers for other stands, and just making it a real community, because it can be lonely. I mean, there was a market worker who's worked for us for 6 months, and I haven't, longer than that actually, and I hadn't met them in person yet, basically, just because I live in Harlem and the market was in Brooklyn, and it's Saturday, and we have 15 different stands being staffed on that day all over the city. So you have to kind of really work to build some further communication to keep them connected to the farmer, and let them know, keep them connected to the other workers around them too in the whole system.
Yeah. It's such a great idea, and it just seems like such a great value to the farmers. And you said initially, you're doing the Grow NYC markets. Do you want to expand? Do you hope to expand? What's like the future goal or plan?
So this season was the first one where we went into Westchester County, which is just north of New York City.
Okay.
Down to Earth and Morning Glory operate the markets in Westchester. They also have some in the city. It's also the first time I worked with a producer kind of as a purchaser reseller. So that's another thing is like, I didn't know what this business would be like, and I wanted to kind of reduce risk as much as possible.
Yeah.
Without overcharging. So, you have ups and downs within reason, but transportation is always going to be there and always going to cost something. So for most of my producers, I charge just a flat fee and like a storage fee. So if they don't go to market that day, they don't have to pay it. But, if they do great, it's not as much of a percentage of their sales. If they don't do as great, at least they showed up, they were consistent for their clients. I found a producer that just the way that they were working with a person who previously done their markets was that person basically, instead of dealing with a fee structure and then a commission of some sort, it was just treated as a margin model. So I basically purchase from them at distribution cost and I operate the stands. I tell people like, no, actually I work with these guys, they're in Bennington, Vermont, and they have an entire dairy operation to operate and, farm relationships to build and food safety out the wazoo, which is like, if you know anything about dairy and cheese making, it's as much like bookkeeping and cleaning as it is anything resembling artisanal work sometimes. That model has been working really well for us because then we can kind of grow. I am interested in launching other brands like that where I have a little more skin in the game. And it's kind of subsidized by the anchor of the logistics, basically.
Yeah. Because
that market, it wouldn't make sense for me to just do those couple markets for just that one farm. But because we already have the warehouse, because I already have, great people, because I already have transportation, it makes the entry point a lot lower. My original idea was also to do delivery during the day, get into wholesale, because I thought, wow, the drivers are done at 7:30 and they don't do anything until 2:00.
Right.
I could get a couple deliveries in. I learned pretty quickly that, wholesale delivery isn't just something that you can do with a little extra space in the truck sometimes. Like, at least from what I was trying to do. I have been delivering for another distributor in Vermont every couple weeks. But yeah, to find the sourcing, to have a complete catalog of products to offer shops and restaurants and to handle different invoices for every single restaurant, like, it's a whole other business. I'm very cautious about growth because I don't want to just jump in and be like, oh, this is easy. I can do e-commerce. It's just putting up a website, or I can do consulting. It's just talking. I have immense respect for what it takes to do all of these different things. And so I'm extra cautious about jumping into them. So geographically scaling too is tricky because what we do works so uniquely with New York City because of what we know, but also because of this density.
Yeah.
Because, that's like the reason we work with farmers 4.5 hours away is because, it is a big city with a wide food shed. But it's also such that if you're a starting younger farmer, you're not going to afford land 45 minutes outside of New York City.
Right.
A lot of starting farmers obviously not even buying land, but the land that's affordable is way the hell out there. And so for all of the hurdles that you have to start as a food business or as any small business, to find some kind of efficiencies there, it's not just that like there is a better solution on the horizon that maybe someday you can afford, but this is something that's made for you. That's been the whole model up here. It's just like, no, the pricing model is flexible. The scale is, we all share in the risk in some way, but like this is explicitly for the weirdness that is a small food farmers market business. Yeah. I'd love for more people to try to do that. I'm not going to launch like 10 by 10 San Jose or anything, but like I want to help whoever wants to do that. I want to help you for sure. Try to build the same kind of relationships and systems.
I think it's great. I mean, are you on the social medias or LinkedIn or anything where people can sort of connect with you if they're interested in I don't know if you're open to that kind of.
Yeah, no, of course. So I'm going to be at the Intense Conference, Farmers Market Conference in San Diego in March.
Amazing.
We have an Instagram. It's 10by10_logistics. And the website, I want to build out more. It's again, like I want to start a mailing list and I want to start a newsletter and all that. But I also acknowledge how much work that takes. And so I want to kind of bite off one thing at a time.
Yeah.
Intense, they do a great job of kind of building that, like the connecting threads between farmers marketing in the whole country. And I want to find more space, more fun things to do in that space, basically. And just having fun with the shared experience, but also seeing where we can learn. There's something that every cheese farmers market vendor can teach the next cheese farmers market vendor. Same for salami, same for veg. And I think like it's real work. And it's more than just showing up and throwing things on a table and taking a nap in the van. You know what I mean? Like it's not to like disparage that, but it's just like there's always some extra detail that you can invest a little more time in, or that you can find someone who's going to love investing that time in and benefit through it.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I think the service you're offering is amazing and much needed. True that it can't necessarily look the same in every location, but I hope that the conversation we had today inspires some people to think about how they can, pool their resources or, support one another logistically, financially, in terms of efficiencies. I think it's a cool conversation. I had no idea that 10 by 10 existed until you reached out. So I'm also super grateful that you did that, because I think it's great.
Yeah, no, I've had no reason for other people to know that we exist, because, it's even within the city area, like there are only so many producers that we could possibly work with. And we're through the basics of our business kind of reaching capacity now until we get to a new warehouse space. But I mean, it's a weird business that, I don't know anyone else is doing it, but if you are, or if you're curious, please email me. It's ph@10by10.biz, all spelled out. You can go to our website. I'm sure it'll be in the bio and everything, but I'm happy to talk, happy to be more coherent in an email than I am in a podcast, hopefully. But I can talk on the phone too. Happy to.
Well, this has been really fun. My cheeks are a little sore from smiling. I just think, I love, despite your hesitation to use the word, I like an innovative business. I think one of the things I dislike is technology in food, because oftentimes it's trying too hard and not helping anything. And it's quite expensive. Is low tech, right? But it, and is meeting a real need and facilitating getting more locally produced food to more people. That's what you're doing, and that's amazing.
And it's using existing infrastructure. You know what I mean? Like I think when you think about every city, I'm sure has had somebody who's tried to do the kind of like online farmers market thing of connecting local producers. And I've seen some do it really well, and I've seen some. It's so difficult, and it's because you have to create home delivery. You have to have some kind of warehousing system. And a lot of them run into the thing where they just expect producers to be okay with maintaining their own online marketplace.
Yeah.
That kind of thing. It's a real job and it's all real work. And I think like, that's great. Like we could even help with that. Like, let's just make this one small thing marginally better. We're already all going to farmers markets. Yeah, it's not the best way to shop. It's not the most convenient. It's not the cheapest, but like it's incredibly fun and it's something we all love to do. So I don't know. Let's use that for what it is. For some brands, for some producers, it's a springboard to the next thing. For some people, it is the business. And we can make it work a little better. Yeah.
Peter, thank you so much for coming and joining me here today.
Really wonderful to talk to you. And like, it's been wonderful to listen to the show for, I don't know how long now at this point in time. There's nothing better than just listening to what other people do with their businesses to figure out ideas. And every single thing you think you're the best at, or you think you have figured out, there's always somebody else who has a different perspective on it. And so proud to be.
Well, thank you for that. And we're proud to have you as part of the community. So thank you again. And maybe I'll catch you in San Diego.
All right. Well, I hope to see you there. Yeah.
All right. Thanks, Peter.
All right. Cheers.
Bye-bye.
For more content like this and connection with other food founders and industry experts, join us inside the Good Food CFO community. Just visit thegoodfoodcfo.com/join to to learn more.
Thank you for joining us here today. If you enjoyed this episode or found it helpful or inspiring in any way, please share it with your founder friends on social and rate and review the podcast wherever you listen. It's the #1 way to help good food founders find the show. We'll be back with a brand new episode next week.